How do Jews view people who are not Jewish? And how do they look at people who are not Jewish that want to convert to Judaism? Hi, my name is Rabbi Shmuel Kopel, and I'm going to share with you a very interesting treat for today. I had a conversation yesterday with a person called Asher Meza. He has a website called TorahJudaism.com. In this conversation, we have a very interesting debate on how to view Gentiles in general and how to view people converting from being a Gentile to Judaism. Before I go to the conversation, I just want to ask you a quick favor. If you have not done it yet, please click the link below that says subscribe. Once you hit the subscribe button, a bell will appear. Click the bell and you will be notified every time I upload a new video. I really hope you understand this. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. There is a bit of heated argument there. So just continue watching and you will see some heated arguments where I disagree with many things he says. He disagrees with many things I said. It is a very interesting conversation. Without further ado, here you go.
All right, so we have on the line, on the video, Rabbi Shmuel Kopel. Now, Rabbi Shmuel Kopel has a very interesting, inspirational story. He's traveled the world, and he was a Chabad rabbi in New Zealand. So, Rabbi, how are you doing this morning or this afternoon where you're in Tzfat?
Baruch Hashem. Thank you for asking. I know that by you it's morning, by me it's afternoon.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background, your history?
Sure. Well, shortly after I got married, I actually spent about a year in Kolol, and then I moved to Australia. I was the director of adult education in a branch of Chabad in Sydney, Australia. From there, after 2 years, I moved to New Zealand and opened up a Chabad house. It was mainly serving Israeli travelers, but I found a lot of people who were not Jewish kept on just arriving at the Chabad house for information about Judaism because they looked at this guy with a kippah and they're like, yeah, we heard about you guys, but they had no other knowledge of what that is.
Do Jews have any history in New Zealand?
That's a very good question. The Jews in New Zealand were there pretty much from the mid-1800s. First of all, New Zealand was settled by England, and there was always a lot of Jews in England, so there was a few people that made it to New Zealand. There was a big gold rush in the mid-1800s that brought a lot of Jews to New Zealand, specifically to the city that I had the Chabad house in, which is Dunedin, a small town in the South Island of New Zealand. And there was actually, they built a shul there to seat 600 people. Eventually they sold that building, but you could just imagine that there was a massive Jewish community there, at least while there was gold. Of course, at a certain point, the gold dry up, and a lot of those Jews moved to other places in New Zealand or Australia. There's a lot of people that are living in Melbourne, Australia, Sydney, Australia, who their grandparents, great-grandparents came from New Zealand and part of the gold rush. They came for the gold rush, and then when the gold was gone, they moved to other places.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that the Jews in Australia today, most of them originally came from New Zealand?
I wouldn't say most. There definitely are a lot of families that come from New Zealand. Australia, there was a lot of opportunity in Australia as well. Australia was built by a lot of English criminals. Instead of putting them in jail, they just sent them off to Australia, and some of them were Jews. Us Jews have a little bit of a share in some criminality, and so there were some of them were Jewish, and there was other opportunities in Australia. So I wouldn't even say a large number of the Australian Jews come from New Zealand, but there are definitely quite a few families that I've met who originated from that. And it's important to point out that there are still a lot of Jews that live in New Zealand. An estimated 10,000 Jews actually live in New Zealand full time.
Being that it was colonized by England, you would say it's predominantly Anglican?
That's that's what it is. I mean, it's
Oh, that's what
pretty
it
much,
is.
there actually is interesting. There are different cities that connect with different parts of England. For example, the city that I was in, Dunedin, was very Irish because the Irish were the ones that came and colonized that particular city. There's some other that are more, English and different. Some cities are just a big mix of different English cultures, but it's all pretty much coming from England. The original people that lived there. Of course, I should say the original people after the Maoris. The Maoris are the native people of New Zealand. They're called the Maoris. And if I missed it, anybody watching who is from New Zealand would be very angry that I refer to the original people as English, because they'll be like, what? What about the Maoris? The Maoris are very important to New Zealand as well.
Did you face any type of anti-Semitism when you were there?
Yes, I was walking down the street and one guy yelled at me, "You Irishman, not you Irish, you Amish, go back to your horse." That was the anti-Semitism that I faced in New Zealand. They didn't even know I was Jewish.
Uh-huh.
Well, there were some. I would say, I mean, there were some Arabs from the Middle East there as well that moved to New Zealand. I wouldn't say anti-Semitism, but they knew I was Jewish, but they probably couldn't be anti-Semitic because it would look too wrong to them. So, but they didn't do anything wrong to me. A lot of the negative, slurs that I would get were not necessarily Jewish. They were, yeah, as I said, I got a few times people thought I was Amish.
Mm-hmm. Well, right now in Australia, I hear that it's getting pretty bad with Muslims there and the Jewish community. Does that in any way resonate with the community in New Zealand?
Well, you have to realize that all the Jews in New Zealand pretty much live a very discreet life. They don't. Australia actually has some Hasidic communities where you have people walking around like me. You go to Melbourne, you'll think that you're in Borough Park. Honestly, you have you have a street there called Balaclava Road, I believe it's called, if I remember correctly. You have kosher restaurants, you have 2 kosher bakeries, and it looks like a borough park, a mini borough park. So it's I could see why Australia would face more anti-Semitism, because there's more overt Jews in Australia. In New Zealand, most Jews are kind of covert, and the only place that you could even know that they're Jewish is in synagogue.
If a Gentile in New Zealand, when you were there, tried to or wanted to attend your Chabad house, what would they expect, or would they be allowed? Did you guys have a program for B'nai Noach or people considering conversion?
That's a great question. As a matter of fact, what I do now has a lot to do with my experience in New Zealand, where people just rocked up at the Chabad house, whether they were Jewish or not Jewish. I know that Chabad as a whole may not take this position, but I feel as a Chabad Chosid that a Jew and a Gentile should both feel equal in a Chabad house. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily equal, but as far as equally welcome, right? Obviously, a Jew has a connection to the Jewish people that maybe is superior than somebody who's not Jewish, but in reality, a non-Jew is also a creation of Hashem, is also a person that has a share in the world and in possibly even in the world to come if they do what's right. The Lubavitcher Rebbe himself, you can see on video that he would meet many people. There was never any rule that in order to come get $1 from the Rebbe, you had to be Jewish. Many people who were not Jewish came by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe did his best to give them the advice that they deserved for them. And that's what I did in New Zealand as well. Jew or non-Jew was welcome. And I would say an interesting story, just to kind of throw this out there, is that there was a guy that came, and he actually said he was Jewish. And so he came to my classes. He's coming to Chabad house. I put on film with him a few times. And then one time I was just speaking to him. I said, well, where's your family from? And he said about some place in England. And I was like, I never heard of a Jewish community there. So I said, I didn't know there was any Jews that lived out there. So he says, no, my parents weren't Jewish. And I said, your parents weren't Jewish, then how are you Jewish? And he tells me, well, he grew up Catholic, and he started reading the Bible, and he came to this conclusion that the whole New Testament was not true, and the only truth was found in the Old Testament. And he was speaking to people, and everybody he spoke to, he said, listen, I accept the Old Testament, but I don't accept the New Testament. So I said, okay, well, that means you're Jewish. So he decided that he thought that the definition of a Jew was a person who rejects the New Testament and accepts the Old Testament. That's what he thought the definition was. Of course, that didn't mean I kick him out. I actually still speak to him every once in a while, and we have a good friendship till today. He raises sheep. He actually donated a few sheep to us. One time we had a shochet that came to New Zealand, and he donated some sheep to Kabbalah so that we can go shech the sheep. And we had some good food from his naturally grown sheep in New Zealand from this non-Jew.
That's cool, man. The reason I ask is because I work with a lot of people who are trying to convert in places all over the world. I never really spoken to someone from New Zealand or Australia. Actually, I have. In Australia, I've heard that they've had a pretty positive experiences in the Chabad houses there. But in places like South America, Gentiles are typically not even allowed inside of the synagogue as a possible convert or as a ben or bat noach, right? But I'm glad to hear that it's different. It's different there. But would you guide them the rest of the way if they were truly interested and they were adamant on not wanting to remain a ben or a bat noach?
I personally have worked with conversion with many different people, and people consult me till today from all over the world. And the reason is because of my experience in New Zealand, it led me to work with many Jews and non-Jews who want to connect to Jewish spirituality, whether or not they're yet Jewish or whether they have any previous knowledge. I speak to everybody, and many people come to me for suggestions on how to convert. I myself do not convert people, but I would like to say that I'm a very good consultant on how to go through the process. So, for example, I will help people wherever they are in the world find the best, most recognized Beth Din in their area, which is a very important thing. Many people who convert, they convert only to find out that they didn't do it good enough and they have to convert a second time. I personally know people that converted 3 times, and I told them, why didn't you come to me before the first one? And I would have saved you some time. But yes, I feel it's important. The Rambam, there's a big mistake I want to mention. There's a big mistake that many people have, that it's the job of the Jew to chase away people from conversion. That's not true. The Rambam clearly says that you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to chase people away from Judaism, because then it feels like you yourself think that it's a bad thing, and then it makes Judaism look bad. You're not allowed to just chase people away from becoming Jewish. What you are supposed to do is, first of all, I would say what you are supposed to do as an individual, if you don't know anything about conversion, the first thing you should do is send somebody to a rabbi. Don't think that I'm going to be the guy to chase him away, because that's not your job. As an individual, anybody watching here, somebody approaches you for conversion, if you don't know what you're talking about, say, I'm sorry, I don't deal with this. I think you should speak to this and this rabbi, and send him to a rabbi. If you are a rabbi and people are approaching you, you're not allowed to chase them away. What you can do is you could forewarn them that it's not an easy task. And one of the things that many Beth Dins tell people is that according to Torah, if you're born not Jewish and you properly keep the 7 laws, God is happy with you because you did what you're meant to do. But if you choose to become Jewish and then you don't follow the full 613 rules, then God perhaps will be upset with you, right? And so by converting, you could actually do damage to yourself. So it's for warning them. You're warning them that if you're gonna become Jewish and you're gonna follow the Torah and keep the mitzvot, then of course it's a great thing. But you also need to be warned that if you don't, it's actually better that you don't become Jewish than to become Jewish and not follow the commandments. And that is a warning that we give people who are converting. And different rabbis do this in different ways. But the idea is not to chase them away. That's number one. It's about forewarning them about that it's not an easy process. It's a difficult process. And it's also a good chance to teach them the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, because many people that want to become Jewish, they don't want to become Jewish because they're interested in wrapping tefillin every day. They're not becoming Jewish because they don't want to drive a car on Shabbos. They're becoming Jewish because that is the best place they found spirituality. And there's a lot of deep spirituality that they could connect with without becoming a full Jew. And if you don't mind, I know I don't want to take too much of your time.
No, it's fine.
But I think it's important. I think it's important to just mention that Judaism for those viewers who may not be Jewish or may not know about Judaism, Judaism is technically a faith for everybody. There's a belief for everybody in the world. However, within that belief, there is Judaism believes that the nation of Israel were commanded more commandments than everybody else. So we have a specific job that is more intense than an average person on this world. That means that we have obligations that other people don't. So there are some obligations that are for everyone in the whole world, and there's some obligations that are only obligated. You're only obligated if you are in fact Jewish, right? And that's why there's a big difference. If you convert to becoming Jewish, that means you are taking on all these extra obligations. Whereas you can follow Judaism without being Jewish. And different people call this different things. Many people call themselves a Bnei Noach, which means a child of Noach, because the main laws that were given to all humanity were given in the time of Noah by the flood. And that's why many people call themselves Bnei Noach, or some people, I say, you're following Judaism even though you're not Jewish, and it's perfectly fine, right? And that's what's important. So we're not talking about a person who says, I love the teachings of Judaism and I want to follow the ways of Judaism. You can do that, and there's a lot to learn and a lot to follow and a lot of deep spirituality that you could connect to, but not converted to Judaism. And then some people say, no, that's not enough. They want to go further. They want to take on this crazy, intense lifestyle that Jews go through. Then they also could convert and actually become Jewish and take on the additional requirements.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you gave that response. I mean, most rabbis don't hold like this in accepting a potential convert with a warm embrace. I don't subscribe completely to it. I mean, I don't believe Jews have an obligation when someone comes to convert to offer them 7 laws or even tell them that there's a standard to. But as long as there's an option, if the person persists, I mean, I'm glad that there are rabbis out there who are willing to help that potential convert the rest of the way. But for example, if you found out, God forbid, that your grandmother wasn't halachically Jewish, would you reconvert to Judaism or would you remain a Gentile?
That is a very good question. And in fact, I can't answer you. I can't answer you honestly because I was never put in that position. Mm-hmm. Again, I personally love the spirituality of Judaism, and I love a lot of the rituals and requirements. I can't say I love them all, right? And if I was put in a situation where I can kind of still have a lot of the things I love about Judaism without the requirements that I don't necessarily like, I can't really tell you conclusively what I would choose. I can't.
Because in terms of spirituality,
it sounds from a rabbi like, wow, but I think that would be the only honest answer. I can't know.
I respect that. In terms of spirituality, it's never really been that appealing for me. In terms of ethics, it's been very appealing. And I think there's a bulk of the college crowd who's looking for an ethical outlet or output for their life. And they're finding it in causes. There's a college crowd out there that is looking for ethics, and they're finding it in other places outside of religion, in secular causes, in environmental causes. So the way I explain it is that there is no ethical system that can outdo the Taryag mitzvot, our commandments, what was given through Moses on Mount Sinai. I mean, spirituality aside, so the way I see it, the more opportunities you have to do good in this world, i.e., the more mitzvot you have, the more good you end up doing. The less mitzvot you have, the less good you end up doing. Now, I understand that from a Kabbalistic perspective, it takes a different spin. It's not necessarily about doing good, but it's about elevating sparks. It elevates everything to a mystical level instead of a practical level. Now, I don't think the average person looking for religion has that at the forefront. So this is why I think that someone who keeps more commandments is closer to God. He's got a bigger halach, but not just in this world, but in the next world, the bigger portion in this world and the next world. And it's not on the same level with someone who just tries to live by 7 laws and tries to really eke out even a spiritual existence with the little that they have for the Gentile in the Jewish world, which is not much, right? I mean, the whole notion of the Sheva Mitzvot is not even a solid idea. It seems that Chazal were debating if it was less, if it was more commandments, exactly what is a Ger Toshav. And I understand that post the Rishonim, it takes on a different life, a different image of itself that it didn't have pre the Rishonim, right? So
I just want to intercede here. There's a few things that you basically touched on a few very important topics, and you probably have more concepts that you want to say, but I want to kind of respond to some of these things. First of all, you kind of split ethics from spirituality, and I think that it's very important to point out why you split ethics from spirituality. Many people look at spirituality as this this type of escape of reality, this type of I got out of this real world and I experienced something beyond. Now, from a Kabbalistic perspective, that's not necessarily the case. Okay, from a Kabbalistic perspective, you accomplishing something is a major. It's a major spiritual thing. So, for example, if you
I'm not a Kabbalist, by the way.
That's fine. If you, for example, were Thomas Edison and you invented electricity and the whole world changed because of you, and so much goodness comes out of that, well, that is a major spiritual accomplishment. One of the things that I work with people is to realize that spirituality, ethics, morality, personal motivation, meaning and purpose, all of these things are intertwined with each other and how you see the world from a spiritual perspective. And I think that it's something where Kabbalah is unique to other spirituality. You take some of the Buddhist ideas, for example, and I've worked with a lot of people that come from that, is that they all tell me that it's a very good escape. It's a very good about kind of taking yourself out of this world. But then once you face life in reality, it's just this bitter, you need to be in this reality because you're forced to be in this reality that is not as cool as the spiritual reality. Whereas from a Kabbalistic perspective, it's actually, you're getting a lot of phone calls today. From a Kabbalistic perspective, what you do and what you accomplish in this world, how you make money, what's your business, these are all spiritual concepts. Right? Some people say, oh, there's no, spirituality has no connection with money. It does. If you are following your spiritual path, everything should fit. So for example, if you need to live in order to do Torah and mitzvot, and in order to live, you have to make money, well, then you're making money as part of your spiritual path, right? Now you have a choice. You can make money by doing it honestly, by doing it not honestly. You can make money by selling one product or a different product. And these are spiritual choices. Which product do you choose to sell? How do you decide which product to sell, and how do you actually sell it? Right? Do you market it in a completely transparent, honest way, or is there a little dishonesty inside of it? Every single aspect of a person's life has a spiritual dimension to it, and that's essentially what I try to get people to realize. And every aspect of life is a form of spiritual ritual, and when you realize that, life is that much more meaningful and productive even. I have somebody that came to me, and after a few weeks, he says, Rabbi, I don't know why, but it seems to me ever since we spoke, I'm making more money. And so he thought that I did some magic trick, and I went poof and got him to make more money. I don't see it that way. I see it that I'm making him realize how important every single aspect of his life and his business is to all of humanity, and to him as a person, giving off a spiritual aura to him in his particular practice. And that's why he's making more money, because people are sensing that they're getting more. And so they're coming to him more, and he's building more clientele, and etc. His employees are following his order. He mentioned this. His employees listen to him better because they see that he's about a higher purpose. He's not just about making money. And all of this actually, according to that particular person, said he started making more money off of that. And he thought it was some hocus pocus that I did, but I'm not one of those Kabbalists. I'm not a hocus pocus Kabbalist. I don't say some fancy names and all of a sudden money's going to pour from the sky. I don't do that.
I'm not a Kabbalist at all. And I typically gear people to a more rational perspective of Judaism, mainly the perspective of the Rambam. So the Rambam is probably the most...
People say the Rambam was a Kabbalist.
That's people say many things,
a dispute.
But at least according to this text, it seems that he was very practical and he was very earthly minded. In other words, he believed that the way you made the world a better place is by keeping mitzvot, by physically keeping mitzvot. Now, I understand that the Kabbalistic world ran with that in a different direction. But I mean, as an ambassador of Torah, my goal in the Torah I teach is to ground people in Torah Shabbat, in the 5 books of Moses, and ask, what does that prescribe for humanity? And it seems that when it says in Parshat Re'eh to choose life, to choose Torah, that you shall live, right? It says that if you don't choose Torah, i.e. what we call today conversion, you're on a path to destruction. And this is reiterated by the Rambam in Asura Bia, like in the laws of Geras. It says that we don't overburden the convert who comes asking questions too much, lest he turn from the good path back to the bad path. In other words,
let me ask you a very,
sure.
I want to ask you a very challenging question.
Sure.
Who do you think is better, Oskar Schindler or somebody, an average Joe Schmo that is in the Orthodox community? Who do you think is better in God's eyes?
That's a good question. Now here, we're not comparing apples with apples. You're comparing apples with cupcakes, right? I mean, you should ask me, like, who do I think is better? An ethical Christian or an unethical Orthodox Jew?
Right, but the reason I'm asking this is because right now we're not talking about Christian versus Jew. We're not talking about Muslim versus Jew or atheist versus Jew. We're talking about a B'nai Noach versus Jew, right? And that's why I'm asking this question. And the reason I'm saying this,
from a Kabbalistic perspective, they believe that as long as a Gentile keeps the Sheva Mitzvot, because he received them through our tradition, right? He's considered one of the Chasidei Umat Ha'olam. He's considered righteous among the nations. Now, that's just one opinion. But that the Rambam holds to. Now, Rabbi Eliezer and Beit Shammai didn't really believe that. This is why the halachas, or the actual halacha, conflicts with that, because it says that when someone comes to convert, we tell them that only Israel has a chelik in Olam Haba, to encourage him on, right? So the Rambam is a codifier, so he's bringing down opinions from both sides. I mean, he's codifying Divrei Sofrim. In my opinion, the person who does more good pleases God more. That's it. You know, right. Whether you have the title Jew or not. However, it's really a catch-22, because you're not going to want to do good unless you believe that these laws you're trying to emulate came from a perfect, omniscient, omnipotent author.
But the question is, which is another interesting question, is belief important? Is it more important to what you do and what you accomplish, or what you believe?
What you do.
And it's not a black and white situation. At the end of the day, when you believe something, it stays in your mind. It doesn't have an impact here in the world. What you do has an impact. And that's why the reason I'm saying this, because I want you to realize that when I say a B'nai Noach could connect to a spirituality in Judaism without becoming Jewish, what I'm trying to say is that very often a person who is not Jewish could accomplish things that a Jew cannot accomplish. I personally, if you ask me on a personal basis, I actually try to encourage B'nai Noach people to specifically stay B'nai Noach. And the reason for that is because right now there are a lot of Jews in the world, a lot of people keeping the Torah and mitzvahs. And so if you add one, it's very nice. You're now going to be doing Torah and mitzvahs. But what about the reality out there that if you stay B'nai Noach and you convince other non-Jews to start following the way of B'nai Noach, that is actually something that's much more needed in the world. It's much more needed today to get people to follow B'nai Noach than it is to get people to be Jewish, right? Because again, according to Judaism itself, if a person's not Jewish, we don't need more Jews to wrap tefillin every day. Right? There's a specific amount of Jews, however many Jews there are in the world that are putting on tefillin, that's how many Jews need to be putting on tefillin every day.
There are more laws than just than ceremonial laws in Torah.
Correct.
I mean, there's ethical laws as well that
I agree,
but not incumbent on a ben or a bat Noach.
But again, the laws are requirements, which means you're forced to be in a certain thing. And also, if once you're Jewish, if a man is Jewish, he has to put on tefillin every day. He has to keep Shabbos. That also will give him a stigma that, oh, you're a Jew, right? And by having the stigma of you're a Jew, well, you might have an impact on other Jews, but will you be able to draw people out from outside? Will you be able to stop anti-Semitism by showing people what the Jewish religion has to offer everybody, right? So the way I see it, and I see this from a Kabbalistic perspective and a classical Torah perspective, that you have to really look at the end result. And this is what I tell people, you need to look at the end result. At the end result, how are you having a bigger impact? How are you making Hashem's name more known in this world by being Jewish or not Jewish? If you make the decision that you could have a bigger impact by staying not Jewish and by encouraging others, I think it would be wrong to actually become Jewish just so you personally perhaps could be able to do more mitzvahs. But that...
So you're saying that the world would be better off if we had less Jews and more Gentiles?
I wouldn't say less Jews. I think however many Jews need to be in the world, God will make it in the world.
I mean, every Gentile is a potential Jew, no?
Hitler killed 6 million of us, and only 60, 70 years later, we're closing in on the number of Jews that were before the Holocaust, right? We can grow back. God is...
There's no difference between a Gentile who converts and keeps Torah and somebody who's born Jewish and keeps Torah. Then you're saying, because you said earlier that the world needs more B'nai Noach, right? So then what you're saying is that the world needs less Jews or potential Jews.
No, what I'm saying, first of all, if there's more B'nai Noach, it doesn't mean there can't be more Jews too. What I'm saying is that the world needs more non-Jews to be following the B'nai Noach. We need there to be a community where such people can get together. I actually just got off, right after I spoke to you last week, I actually spoke with a guy, I don't have his name here. He actually runs a B'nai Noach center, right? He's not Jewish, he runs a B'nai Noach center, and I was very impressed with him. And the reason I was so impressed with him is because, you know, he was telling me, and this is the same thing I had, there's a lot of people around the world that realize that they're B'nai Noach, and they feel extremely lonely. They don't have community. Right. So what happens is that you have in some cities 5 B'nai Noach, and they're all in different places, and each one is lonely, and neither of them are really helping encourage more people to be B'nai Noach. Whereas if we
should convert, well, I mean, that's what the Rambam says. Like the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim says that they shouldn't be encouraged to create some sort of religion, but if they're serious about keeping Torah, they should just convert to Judaism.
I haven't really seen that in those exact words. If I did, I perhaps would change my mind, but I did read the Rambam, and I didn't quite see that, where he suggests that if a person definitely wants to follow B'nai Noach and not convert, that's not,
No.
the right thing.
Well, if someone is adamant to not converting, like, you don't force anyone to convert. And I'll tell you, nowadays, it's rare to find someone who only wants to keep the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. Virtually all these Noahites typically just want to be Jewish, but because we have a conversion crisis, they're forced to in some way sit on the fence. But to in some way strengthen that crutch and make it harder for people to convert, I think that Kabbalistic Judaism nowadays is more Galut Judaism, and a more biblical Torah-based notion of Judaism.
I see that you haven't learned too much Kabbalah, because if you would read what the Kabbalists say, it actually says the reason why we're still in exile is because people don't properly understand the Kabbalistic tradition the way they should. And I think
Chazal also say that the reason that we're still in exile is because we haven't acquired enough converts.
First of all, it doesn't say that clearly. It says that there is a suggestion that we do, and there's a lot of people that argue with that, and that's why rabbis are not running out trying to make converts. It's not so simple the way you say it either. There is a concept that we are meant to go to different places so that people could convert to Judaism. The question is if that needs to be a goal. When we're looking at the Messianic era, we're not necessarily looking at the world all becoming Jewish. We're looking at a Messianic era where people understand godliness the right way, and they follow the Torah the right way. And for many people, that's going to be being B'nai Noach, right? And people, I don't, again, I would love to open the Rambam with you, because I think that there's a bit of a misquote there where he's saying if you want to follow Torah, just become Jewish, because I don't remember seeing that in Hilchos Melachim. I don't remember seeing that at all.
I believe it's in chapter 10. It says that
I
they
could
should be allowed to create their own religion. In other words, like create festivals for themselves, or
right. So it speaks about it speaks about them not creating something outside of the Torah. That's what it says.
Outside of the Sheva Mitzvahs.
Right. I'm saying they shouldn't create something outside of that. So that's also discussed. There's a lot of books that are out there on the concept of B'nai Noach, and it includes that. So, for example, the question is, could they make, their own holidays and celebrations? There are different opinions on how they could and how they probably shouldn't. They shouldn't be making a Torah observant Gentile should not be making a totally new system that just happens to also abide by the Sheva Mitzvahs. It's meant to be a following that you're following the Sheva Mitzvahs because it came through the Torah, specifically because Moses taught it to us on Mount Sinai. He taught it to the Jews in order to then teach it to the Gentiles. That was the idea, and not that.
That's one type of Ger Toshav, right? It says, the Rambam says that we don't offer them with the 7 laws. We compel the nations to keep them on threat of death. So this is clearly not something that someone should try to aspire to. Like, it seems, according to the Rambam, that if someone wants a serious relationship with God, spirituality aside, I mean, mainly from the Torah, like if someone wants a serious relationship with God, it would behoove them to want to keep more mitzvot, right? Now, mitzvot are not just, like separating shatnez and you're wrapping tefillin. There's ethical laws that Gentiles or a ger toshav is not commanded to keep. That if more people kept them, the world would be a better place, right? I mean, there's no mitzvah to love your neighbor as yourself, to burn the evil from amongst your midst, to honor your parents, right? I understand the example that's typically given.
Well, let's go back to Oskar Schindler. If Oskar Schindler were to be given retroactively, he would be given a choice that prior to World War II, he could have converted to Judaism and been thrown in the gas chambers together with the other Jews, or he could remain exactly who he was and do what he did. And you were to ask God which one he would prefer, which one would you say? Would he prefer that he converted to Judaism and died in the gas chamber, or that he maintained himself as a Gentile and saved thousands of Jews?
So it sounds like you're saying that God predestined the Nazi persecution and in some way knew that everything was going to happen just like it was going to happen, and that Jews had no way out of it.
I don't think I said anything. I didn't.
No, you're saying What that?
No, I'm taking one
Oscar
person.
Schindler, what could have lied
I'm
about
taking
being a
one
Jew
person.
and
I'm
done even
talking about
more
one
good in this
person.
world.
I'm
I mean, as you
talking
know,
about one. I'm talking
Oscar
about one
Schindler
particular person. That's it.
wasn't
I'm
the
not
most
talking
ethical
about anybody
person on this
else.
planet outside of saving Jews,
That's fine.
right?
That's fine. Again,
But to say
but
that he
that's
couldn't
why I'm
have done
saying.
more by feeling compelled to do more because he accepted the Torah, I think that's kind of creative. You know, I just don't.
Again, I'm taking a practical guy, Oscar Schindler. He has a choice. He can become Jewish and die in the gas chambers,
All
or he
right.
would remain
So
a
like if Oscar
Gentile and not.
Schindler became Jewish
Which
and
one do you think God wants him?
or million more people like Oscar Schindler also became Jewish, perhaps the Holocaust wouldn't have happened.
Again, you're looking at hypotheticals. I'm looking at a fact. Let's take one
You're
person and
looking.
try to.
I mean,
Let's
it's the
take
same
one
line of
person and try
reasoning.
to do it. It's not the same line, and I don't see it as the same line as reasoning at all. I think it is it's totally different. What I'm trying to say is that you have certain people who, in their Gentile capacity, perhaps, and again, I'm not saying for sure, I'm saying perhaps in their Gentile capacity, could do more good than they could as a
Okay.
Jew. And the
Question,
question
like
is,
which law of Noah propelled Oscar Schindler to save a life apart from his own?
um, no particular rule required him to do that.
Correct. So he went
But
above and beyond. He decided to keep mitzvot that weren't applicable to him, just like it would benefit the world if more Gentiles kept more mitzvot, i.e. ultimately 613 mitzvot that initially do not apply to them.
But at the same time that the seven commandments of Noah didn't require him to save the Jews at the risk of his own life. First of all, a Jew themselves wouldn't either be a Jew wouldn't either have that obligation. There's no obligation for a Jew to risk his own life to save another Jew. There's no such obligation. It's a good thing as well. So whether he was Jewish or not, it wouldn't change his obligation in that particular area.
I mean, according to the Rambam, there is the notion of dying al Kiddush Hashem means
absolutely.
that
It's not required. It's not required.
no, right. Well,
It's
he brings it down as one of the.
It's required to die if you personally are threatened to leave Judaism or to be killed. You have a responsibility to die. But if you see somebody else getting killed, right, and if you see somebody else getting killed, you have a responsibility to try to save them. But not if you have a chance of dying in the matter. If you have a chance,
something could be a mitzvah and not necessarily required. That's a definition between a negative commandment and a positive commandment. So the Rambam breaks it down as a positive commandment, to die al Kiddush Hashem. In other words, for sure it's a mitzvah. Is it a chovah? No, it's not a chovah because not everyone's on that level. But it's still part of the Taryag mitzvot, according to the Rambam. What these Gentiles would be taking upon themselves if they converted.
Well, then, if that's the case, you can argue that Schindler was required by the seven mitzvahs b'nei Noach, because the seven mitzvahs b'nei Noach, part of that is not to kill, and therefore anybody that is killing a fellow man has the obligation to stop the other fellow man from breaking the seven mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So if you're going to look at it from that point of view, Oscar Schindler was required by the mitzvot b'nei Noach, the seven commandments of Noach. He would have been also obligated to do the same thing.
I'm sure Oscar Schindler probably would have been put to death in a day, for stealing something that's worth less than a shava pruta, i.e. stealing from the government people who it wanted to exterminate, that in some way be held as an example of a righteous Gentile. I mean, that someone who keeps the seven Noahide laws or takes it upon themselves and breaks one of them without a pre-warning and with only one judge is put to death by decapitation. I mean, that's the halacha. I mean, this is clearly not something to aspire to, right? It seems that this is something that we offer someone who doesn't know any better, i.e. a Gentile living or traversing through Jewish land. They have to at least elevate themselves over the animal by keeping seven laws. But someone coming from, let's say, Christianity or Islam, which are more ethically serious religions, it's hard to offer them something that makes them less ethical. I'm not saying less holy, but less ethical, because you have less laws, right? And I'm pretty sure that...
Again, I think we're going around in circles, and it's, at the end of the day, we don't necessarily agree on some of these issues, and I guess you'll preach what you want to preach, and I'll preach what I want to preach, and it's fine.
No,
But
I hear you. I
I
hear.
don't see it that way. I see it. I see it that there could be situations where it is spiritually beneficial for a person to remain B'nai Noach, and not become Jewish,
Mhm,
and that's the way I see it. Again,
mhm.
as I told you, I never discourage. I've never seen the concept of discouraging somebody from becoming Jewish.
I
I've never
appreciate
seen
that,
that.
by the way,
I've
and I
never
respect
seen
you for
that
that.
written. I've never seen that written anywhere in a Judaic source. I may be wrong. I haven't read every book, but I have read a lot of the main books. I haven't really seen the concept of discouraging them. I think it's a myth that kind of goes around. It's not about discouraging them. It's about forewarning them that if they choose to convert and they don't follow Judaism, they don't follow all of the commandments. It is worse for them than had they never converted. That is what it does say in many places. This is what most rabbis will forewarn converts before converting. But I don't think it's
Mhm,
you're not supposed to discourage. At the same time, I think the difference between my message and your message, my message to a prospective convert is, I want you to consider that perhaps it's better for you to stay non-Jewish because you have a benefit of staying non-Jewish over being Jewish, whereas you seem to think that no, we should tell the person, it's always best to become Jewish, and I don't necessarily agree with that.
right.
But that's fine. I do want to point out something else very interestingly, which is something that I've been encountering a lot. And that is the fact that the Jewish nation bled many people throughout the centuries. We lost people in Spain in the Holocaust, and both the Holocaust and the Spanish Inquisition, there were many people that hid their Jewish identity to defend themselves against that, and not all of them ended up passing that on through the generations. There are
Mhm,
many people today that are taking DNA tests that have strong maternal connection. They can actually check on the DNA test through their mother. They have a strong maternal connection to Judaism. There are many people that have interesting stories, especially from the Marranos. I personally met a few people here that they had interesting stories of how their grandmother used to light candles every Friday in a shed. You have a lot of these situations. I've met a lot of them, and I've heard even more stories. This is a totally new ball game, okay? And the reason why this is a totally new ball game is because if somebody approaches you and they say that I have a significant doubt that I might be Jewish, even if they say I don't know if I'm Jewish, but because of my DNA and because of my stories, I have a significant fear, doubt that I am already Jewish, the whole scene must change. And I think that many rabbis make the mistake of not realizing this major problem in today's Jewish
mhm,
world. Because if somebody tells you that I have a doubt whether I'm Jewish for any reason, but I'm obviously a reason, I'm not talking about a guy who just decided I'm Jewish because I feel that way. We're talking about a person that has some rational reason why they might be Jewish. That would mean that every single day that they do not put on film, there's a suffix, the oiraisa. A suffix, the oiraisa, means there's a doubt whether they have a biblical obligation or not. And when it comes to such people, I am very highly encouraging them to convert. And the reason why I do that is because you're not saying that I'm not Jewish and I want to become Jewish. If you say that I'm not Jewish, I have no idea that I ever had any Jewish ancestry. I actually have a person that I'm working with uh, for a while already, and he has strong feelings towards Judaism, but he even took DNA tests and he did family research. He can't find any trace of Jewish blood. I said, okay, well, then you're B'nai Noach, don't worry about it. But I have another guy who he traces himself to a specific city, that specific city had a major Jewish community in it. And at a certain point in time, they were hidden. And he comes from that city. He connects with Judaism in a tremendous way. He hates anything that has to do with anything outside of Judaism. And he has a significant reason to think that he is already Jewish. So that's a different story, right? Because now, if we don't convert him and he is Jewish, that means that he's going to be sinning every day of his life when he shouldn't be. right? I think that this is an area of conversion that a lot of rabbis don't consider properly, right? And this is very important because
I'm
it's
not a fan of this, by the way. And I'll tell you
about
what,
what?
because we're elevating blood over ethics. You're telling me that if somebody comes from Christianity or Islam and they're devout already, they want to accept Torah, they want to convert to Judaism, but they have no Jewish pedigree. While somebody who comes knows nothing about Torah, but finds a piece of paper that their great-great-grandmother may have been Jewish, that they should be given special treatment. It sounds like we're elevating blood over ethics, and I don't think that's the actual message in Torah. I mean, for sure the Rishonim bring down the notion, Chazal bring down the notion of a tinuk shenishba, right? So a tinuk shenishba, it's someone who has some understanding of God, but he was led astray by apostates, right? So the Rambam says that we should be patient with them, and that we shouldn't run to kill them, although their din, if they deny Torah, Torah Shabbat Peh or Torah Shabbat Tav, is that they ultimately have to be killed. But he's saying that we should be patient with people who have some understanding of God, not an atheist or some college kid who's given a free trip to Israel on birthright just because he happens to have Jewish blood. I think this whole notion that blood matters is the last primitive belief that we have to get over, right? Intentions matter.
But there's only one problem with what you're saying. If you were the one deciding what is ethical and what isn't ethical, that might make sense. The Torah is absolutely clear that the 613 commandments are only required of those who are either of Jewish descent, through the mother specifically, or they convert completely. If they do not convert completely, they are not required to do this. Okay, one of the reasons why you mentioned that in the Gemara, I believe it is, where it speaks about conversion, it says that there's one of the problems with conversion is that if a person converts and then stops keeping the Torah, it actually reflects bad on the Jewish people as well, because there's another Jew not keeping the Torah. Now, if there's a Jew born Jewish, he's already not keeping the Torah. It's already a black mark on the Jewish nation that we have a member of ours that's not following the Torah.
Whereas they're not a member of ours. If they don't identify with Torah,
if they are Jewish according to Torah, they are ours according to Torah. And if they do not follow the Torah mitzvahs, even if they're tinuk shenishba, it is a black dot on us. And this is very clear throughout the Torah. So if you want to make up your own Torah, that's fine.
It doesn't say this in Torah Shabbat Tav. And to reiterate the Rambam also writes in Hilchos.
Definitely says this. It definitely says this in Torah Shabbat Peh in many places.
So the Rambam says that the Torah.
I'll tell you what. You tell me it doesn't say it. It does say this in Torah Shabbat Tav, because as a matter of fact, the reason why the Jewish people go by the mother and not by the father is because when it speaks about intermarriage, it mentions that you should not intermarry because they might take your children astray. That's what it says. And it only considers your children in that verse. It only considers your children of a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father. And the Torah is warning the Jewish people that if somebody is born to a Jewish mother and their Jewish father is not
someone
Jewish,
who converted,
they're Jewish again. Let's look at what it says in the Torah. If a person is of a Jewish mother and not of a Jewish father, the Torah forewarns that may lead to the father bringing the child away from Judaism and into idol worship. And it says, God will punish you, the children of Israel. It says this in the Torah, God will punish the children of Israel because their child went astray. And so it's very clear that if the person's mother is Jewish and they go astray, we as a nation of Israel can suffer consequences. And this is in the written Torah, the written Torah, in the 5 books of Moses. It's very clear that if a person...
I'm very familiar with that statement. It's reiterated.
It's in Devarim, in Chumash Devarim.
Right.
But the point
bring it down.
You have
something said by Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. But this is only for practical reasons. But this has nothing to do with the born Jew.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is that if a person is born Jewish and they do not follow the Torah, it is a blemish to the nation of Israel. If a person is not Jewish and they convert to Judaism and then they stop following Judaism, they are a blemish to Israel. right? That is why rabbis till today are hesitant to accept the convert, because it's a blemish on Israel if they don't follow Judaism. And so back to what I was saying before.
Wait. Let me respond to that statement in the Torah. Hold on 1 second.
I want to finish. When we speak about blood over ethics, it's you may be right from an argument perspective. You may be right. Hey, here's a person that wants to follow Torah. Here's a person who just happens to be born Jewish. You may be right according to philosophy, but from a biblical perspective, it's absolutely unequivocally clear that from the Torah's perspective, it is worse for the Jewish nation if a person born Jewish is not following Torah than if a person who was never born Jewish and never converted, doesn't follow that. So it's not. The blood over ethics is not my decision, it is the position of Torah unequivocally. I don't see.
I'm going to respond to that respectfully. So it says
we have to kind of limit the time because I have another 5 minutes.
No, got you. Yeah, but that statement in Torah has nothing to do with somebody born Jewish. I mean, don't forget, like a few prakim before, these people were in Egypt worshiping idols, and the heir of Rav also converted. Okay, what it's telling you is that absolutely that we should guard the future of our children, but that they should walk in God's ways. This is why God says that He loved Avram Avinu, because he would lead his descendants in the paths of God. This has nothing to do with someone who's born Jewish having a special soul and this and that. In other words, well, Chazal bring down the notion that what do we do with a baby that we find in a non-Jewish city? It says that we take him home and we convert him. And it says, how can you make a ger katan, someone converted outside of their will, a baby? Because you don't need permission to do something nice for someone. So this notion of guarding our children to be on the right path is not something that's only obligated on people who are born of some Jewish pedigree, if that even exists, right? That's just my correction there. I'm just trying to correct what that statement says.
I think that you need to differentiate. And here's what I'm trying to say. You need to differentiate between the fact that you're saying that you're arguing, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing. You're arguing it's very good to make as many people Jewish as possible. And again, there's room to argue, but this seems to be your statement. But you have to be able to split that from the fact that if a person is already born Jewish, they are much more important for us to strengthen their Jewishness than somebody who's not Jewish.
I disagree.
So
but just let me finish responding, because you said that
Judaism. You're not disagreeing with me. You're disagreeing with Judaism.
Okay. All right. So you said that the commandments are only incumbent on Israel. So the Rambam writes there in Hilchos Malachim, he says that yes, the commandments are the inheritance of Jacob, of Israel, and whoever wants to convert. It doesn't say whoever converts, whoever wants to convert. All right. So the notion that someone knows Torah to be true and is in some way encouraged to do less or feel bound to do less is not a notion that is a blanket idea throughout Chazal and Torah Shebektav. It seems that even the halacha teaches us that a secular Jew who doesn't know that commandments exist, right? He's not liable, like, for not putting on tefillin if he doesn't know whether those mitzvot exist, right?
Okay, so I'm actually looking right now at Hilchos Malachim chapter 10. And I would like you to pretty much tell me, where do you see this? Where do you see that that they should convert or anything? I don't see anything like that.
In terms of, what do you mean should convert? I'm talking about, like, feel encouraged.
So let's say, first of all, I want to mention something else it actually says here very clearly. It says a ben noach that wants to do one of the other mitzvahs, it's fine. They can do that. So they don't have to become Jewish to do the mitzvah. Yeah. So you say about ethics, a person who's b'nei noach is allowed to do that. They're allowed to do the ethics of the Jewish people if they want. I don't see anything about specifically the Torah was meant for people. Again,
right, so look at chapter 8, halacha 10.
Okay, so chapter 8, okay, halacha 10 you said, right? Moshe Rabbeinu lehin kol Torah mitzvahs el Yisrael shneimar midrash kiyos Yaakov. He only gave the Torah to v'chol haroitze lihizgai mishar u'misha nemar.
Right, and those who want to convert, right?
Yeah. So okay. So it's those who want to convert. So if they want to convert, they could
to convert, not necessarily converted. In other words, if someone comes to you with telling you, "I want to be part of Israel," one shouldn't encourage them to remain a ben or a bat Noach. And this is reiterated in chapter 14 of Serbia.
All right, could first of all, it's not 100% clear from the wording, but let's continue. So, and it says specifically we're not supposed to force people to become Jewish.
Correct.
First of all, when you look at the Rambam, when it says anybody that wants to be Megar, well, first of all, how do you know if they want to be Megar or not? And I think that's the essence of what rabbis will do when they're, it's not about, as I told you, it's not about discouraging. We don't discourage people from becoming Jewish. We just want to see if that's really what they want.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're discouraging if you're giving them another path to go on and saying that they're just as important to God if they keep less mitzvot.
Why would you want to convert if the idea is that, and I think that this is really where all the rabbis kind of where conversion gets a little bit cloudy, is that the idea of conversion is to ensure that the person sincerely wants to and is willing to accept what's going on. Different rabbis have different protocols on how to prove that, right? But they have to want it.
Hold on.
They have to want it.
All poskim, in terms of Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Torah, and it reiterates, I mean, it's just repeating what it says in Yevamos. It says that you don't overburden them with encouragement lest they turn back to the bad path. In other words, we want people to keep more Jews. The more mitzvot you keep, the more important you are to God. The more important you are to this planet.
But different mitzvahs, there's a mitzvah in quality and a mitzvah in quantity. And this it says very clearly in many places. It's not a point system. Oh, you did 5 mitzvahs and you did 4. One mitzvah of one person could be worth 1,000 mitzvahs of somebody else. And there's a quality and a quantity to mitzvahs. It's not a game of points.
So let's talk about the 7
laws. By the way, I just want to mention to you, because you did mention earlier specifically in the name of the Rambam, that the Rambam is saying that people who keep the Sheva mitzvahs don't have a chelik in Olam Haba. And that Rambam, actually, I'm just happened to be glancing through it. The Rambam says the exact opposite. And I'm going to read it to you word for word. It says, Kol hamakabel sheva mitzvahs. Everyone that accepts on themselves the 7 mitzvahs, every non-Jew who accepts the Sheva mitzvahs, says, these are lases, and they're careful to do them properly. These are the righteous of the nations. Yesh loy chelik lo'olam haba, and he does have a portion in the world to come. Of course, he has to do that specifically because God commanded it and not because he decided that these are good, reasonable things to do, but he's actually accepting this as from a higher authority from Hashem, etc.
Okay.
So
now, okay,
very clearly.
So the Rambam in Asirabiyah chapter 14, the 4th halacha, it says that we tell him that the world to come is hidden away for the righteous, and they are only the Jews.
Okay, where is that? Hold on, where is that?
It's in Asirabiyah.
What's that? Oh, Isurabiyah. Okay. Isurabiyah. Let's see if I can find that.
It's in Sefer Kedusha. It's in Sefer Kedusha.
Sefer Kedusha. Isurabiyah. Which chapter?
14.
Chapter 14. Which one you said it was in?
4th halacha. So clearly, this is a contradiction. Why?
First of all, it seems like a contradiction, but I wouldn't say 100% here because he's not. But
the Rambam's not inventing anything. Where the Rambam is a codifier.
It's not,
all right.
Okay,
so he's bringing down halal. This is the actual halacha, but that appears in Shulchan Aruch. It appears in Masechet Yevamot, right? While Hilchos Malachim is his opinion of other midrashim that appear by Chazal.
Stop. Why is Hilchos Malachim any different than Hilchos Isurabiyah? I want to tell you like this.
Let me respond to that, because the way you differ between what's a halacha and what's just a shita is that halacha tells you to do something.
There's one problem that the Yad HaChazaka, the book of the Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam writes in the beginning is halachas, and everything in it was his halachic opinion. There's nothing in the book of Yad HaChazaka that is not his halachic opinion.
All right. So in Mishnah Torah, he gives advice. Like, for example, in Hilchos Deis, he tells you don't eat fruit because it's unhealthy. In other words, there's medical advice in there, and only because it appears as halacha aleph or halacha beis, but doesn't mean it's an actual halacha.
It is natural. It is an actual. No, it is an actual halacha. It's an actual halacha to treat you. It's an actual halacha to look after your personal health needs. It happens to be that the Rambam was a doctor and he knew what these needs were, and therefore, when he wrote his halachic work, he included things that he knew for a fact were how to properly care for your body.
Right, so the Rambam also says that medical advice given over by Chazal could be completely disregarded. Why? Because
but again, the Yad HaChazaka, the book Yad HaChazaka that you're quoting, it clearly says in the introduction that it's halachas. It's specifically the halachas. I want to tell you two things. So we have this contradiction between what you say in Surah Bia and what you see in Hilchos Malachim. First of all, if you look at it in Surah Bia is telling you what you're supposed to tell a potential convert. As you should tell them.
Right. What you do.
No, stop.
Not what you believe.
It's not saying fact. It's saying what you're supposed to tell them. That's number one.
So that's halacha.
No, hold on.
Look, halacha deals with what you do, like not what you believe. Right?
Listen carefully. Again, listen carefully. In Hilchas Surah Bia, we're telling you what you're supposed to tell a convert. We're not telling you what the reality is. In Hilchas Malachim, it tells you this is the reality that a person who follows the Sheva Mitzvahs, it has a chelik in Olam Haba. So one's telling you reality, one's telling you what you should tell the convert. So that's number one. Now, I wouldn't say that we would suggest telling a convert something that's not true, right? I wouldn't say that. What I would say, and again, I think it's important to look at the Mefarshim, but what I would say based on my analysis of these two quotes that you brought is that when you're speaking to a convert and you say that only Jews have a portion in the world to come, it doesn't say only, it says only the nation of Israel and the other nations don't. And the reason it's saying the other nations don't is because the other nations is referring to their way of life. It's not referring to the exceptions amongst the nations. It's not saying that every person outside of Israel. It says all the nations outside of Israel
but it
don't
didn't
have,
tell you to say that to them.
It speaks it as
in other words, do you feel that you're breaking the halacha by telling a Gentile who's interested in converting to accept the seven laws of Noah, when here it clearly, in terms of halakha lemaseh, what you're supposed to do, only tells you to tell them that Jews have a share in the world to come, to encourage them to convert, not to discourage them. But do you feel that you might be breaking the halacha?
I don't see that way at all, because again, the quote is very different than the way you initially presented it. The quote is saying, it's not saying that they don't, like you could only have a portion in the world to come if you're Jewish. It doesn't say that. It speaks as nations, as nationality.
Let's put it in context. It's talking to a Gentile who knows nothing about Torah. He's coming to Torah because he found something special about it that he wants to enter the Jewish people. Right? Okay. Well, this person wasn't in a Ger Toshav program.
So now we want to test him. What is he interested in doing? Is he interested in following all of the Torah, or is he not interested in following all the Torah? So if I give a person an option, if I give a Gentile an option and say, hey, why don't you just lead a good life as a person following the Sheva Mitzvah? And he says, yes, that's perfectly good. You know what that proves? That he's not interested in following the whole Torah. And that's why I told him.
It doesn't say to teach him all the Torah. It says to teach him some of the mitzvot, but not all of them.
Agreed, but he has to want to follow the whole Torah. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. In my experience, many of the people that are coming and approaching rabbis to convert are not converting because they want to put on tefillin every day. They're not converting because they don't want to drive on Shabbos. They're converting because they want to connect with Jewish spirituality. And the fact is that they could convert to Jewish spirituality without being Jewish. And if that's what they want, that's what they should do. Because if they do that, they're considered the righteous amongst nations, as the Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that you quoted. And if they don't, if they want to do more, and many of them do. Many of them tell me, no, even though I can be a Bnei Noach, I want to go.
I think if it was just left to motivation, like you wouldn't feel like such an obligation to reach out to atheistical Jews just because they happen to have Jewish blood. In other words, those people don't want to keep mitzvot to begin with. In other words, they're more likely to relapse.
But we as a nation of Israel are at fault when any one of our members are not following the Torah.
Yeah, but they're not our members.
They are our members. So the
Rambam writes clearly that they're no longer part of Israel, like in the
the very same Rambam is the one that speaks about Kinuk Shel Mishpah.
Correct.
Okay, and many rabbis.
So you acknowledge that the Rambam says that basically atheistical Jews, Kofrim, are no longer part of the Jewish people.
An atheistic Jew is not a kofar, and today, in today's day and age, most rabbis believe, including myself,
I mean, a kofar is someone who denies God. So, I mean, by definition, I mean, he's a kofar.
That's not true, by the way, but whatever. Anyways, I'm not going to get into it, and we're kind of going way over time, and I have another meeting coming up. But
no,
at the end of the day, the way I see it is that if you're looking at people today, any person today that is born to a secular family, or even if they're born to an Orthodox family and they leave, it is not because they're really rejecting the Torah. It's either because they never learned the Torah, or they didn't properly understand the Torah, and they were drawn away by the awe or the glitz of the nations that exists today. And
the vast majority of the big atheists in the world are Jews, or ethnic Jews.
It's not necessarily.
Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins.
A lot of the big ones were.
Hitchens,
a lot of the big
Carl
ones were,
Sagan.
but they weren't Jewish. They weren't atheists because they learned the Torah and understood the Torah and they rejected it. They were atheists because they understood the Torah as a false concept. And
so you're telling me that they're more special to God than, let's say, a Mother Teresa?
I'm not going to deal with Mother Teresa right now.
No, or some Gentile who tries to do. Or some Gentile who tries to do good. Are you saying that an atheistical Jew who fights against the existence of God is more important to God?
I am the one that says that Oskar Schindler is much more beloved by God than most Orthodox Jews today that sit here and follow the Torah. I'm the one that said that. You're the one that disagreed. But just on that point,
well, because he wasn't keeping the Sheva mitzvahs. He was beloved to God.
Even if he
was emulating God's commandments in Torah.
I don't care even if he broke the Sheva mitzvahs. The fact, as I told you, mitzvahs, commandments have quality and quantity. We're not in a baseball game where you kept 3 mitzvahs versus 4 mitzvahs. 1 mitzvah of a person could be worth 1,000 of somebody else. It all depends on your level. And if you ask me, I think Oskar Schindler is much more beloved by God than most of the Orthodox Jews that spend their entire life wrapping tefillin and keeping Shabbos. That's the way I see it. And I say the same thing for you. You ask about the atheist Jews. Again, I can't even tell you. It could be God loves an atheist Jew more than he loves me. Because it could be that atheist Jew, his 1 or 2 deeds that he did are valued more than everything that I've done in my life. It could be, right?
You believe more mitzvot.
So no, I say there's quantity.
More good in this world.
No, I said there's quality and quantity. We're not playing a numbers game of did you do 4 mitzvot or you did 5 mitzvot.
Gentiles only have 7 laws.
That's fine.
That they're bound to keep.
A Gentile could do something. A Gentile could do something in his life that is more value to God than everything that a Jew can do in their life. The only question is, and here's where I made my statement.
They do it in spite of being Gentiles.
So what? A Gentile that says,
in other words, like if they converted, they could do more. Obviously.
Take a Gentile. A Gentile says God created the world. He doesn't want people to kill each other, and therefore I'm going to risk my life to save people from getting killed. That is a very good thing. God loves that. That particular action could be more valued by God than everything that I've done in my entire life. Even though if you want to go quantity, I've done many more commandments than they did, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I did more in God's eyes than they did. It doesn't matter because there's a quality and a quantity. And it's important to realize this as well. What I did say is whether God wants somebody to be following the Torah or not. And to me, it's unequivocally clear from the Torah itself, and not from me, because I don't have a particular opinion. Maybe you're right that somebody who wants to more than somebody less. That's an opinion, a philosophical way of thinking. But it's unequivocally clear to me from the Torah that the Torah would prefer somebody who was born blood Jewish to follow the Torah than he would want a Gentile to convert and start following the Torah. And to me, that's unequivocally clear, and not only from God's perspective.
Funny, I don't see it in Torah Shabbat or Torah Shabbat Peh.
Okay, well, I quoted it for you. And
this is why the Kiruv movement is really less than 100 years old, right? Because I don't think Chazal cared about your past.
Because before 100 years, there wasn't such a big movement. The secular movement, the Enlightenment movement, pulled a lot of Jews away from Judaism for the first time. There was never a time in Jewish history prior to about 150 years ago where a majority of the Jews were non-observant. Today, the majority of Jews are not observant, right?
I think Chazal had no problem with pushing people away who happened to have Jewish mothers just because they were detriment to Torah and the Jewish people. In other words, teaching foreign ideas. In other words, Chazal didn't care who your parents were. They cared like if you wanted to follow Torah. This is why Gerim.
I disagree, and we have to end the conversation because we're running. We already went way over, but again, it's a good conversation. It's an interesting conversation. We definitely disagree on certain areas, but that's life. And
overall, I respect what you do.
If there's two Jews, there's three opinions, and me and you, because we're very opinionated Jews, because me and you are very opinionated Jews, therefore me and you have a lot more than three opinions, right? So there's two Jews, there's at least 10, 20 opinions out here.
Anyways, I appreciate you, man. Okay, and keep up the good work. You're a life coach, you're a counselor, right? And ultimately, you're bringing people closer to Torah, and you don't even know it. But yeah.
And I'm sure you'll do a good job as well.
Zerat Hashem.
Okay. All the best.
Okay, be well. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.